Hello, my name is Julia Ringhausen. My advisors are Jen Young and Sarah Fisher. This summer, I've been working as an education intern on the NGRREC, or the Mississippi River Exchange Program. So the Mississippi River Exchange Program is a program that is being built from the ground up and is being curated for high school students. It is incorporating STEAM learning, so science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and it will have an emphasis on the importance of the Mississippi River and just the overall importance of how water plays into not only our individual lives, but also in our entire ecosystem and world. If you look over to the picture on the right, you can see the entire Mississippi River Basin, and you can see just how much of an impact that the Mississippi River really has on the world and our country. So this program will incorporate lessons about the history of the Mississippi River, and it will also include lessons on the history of transportation on the river, because learning about the past is very important in order to make changes to the present and move on towards our future. One of the main things that this program will encompass is a hands-on learning experience of building a boat. So this summer, I have been spending my time researching and conducting interviews and learning more about these two different types of boats. So the first boat is a wooden strip canoe, and then the second is a wooden john boat. So a little bit about the Mississippi River history. The Mississippi River is about 2,300 feet in length, and it spans across about 32 states. It is the first longest river in the United States and the fourth in the entire world. Historically, the Mississippi River was utilized as a quote-unquote highway for people who lived around the area. And this was before the transportation revolution kicked off, where there were steamboats and railroads really booming. So as I stated, most people lived around the area of the Mississippi River just because of the convenience, and people could travel back and forth from one big city to the next on the river. And it was also a large source of trade and communication, since that's where most everyone inhabited. So this summer, I learned about canoe history from just researching and talking to different people who were experts on the Mississippi River history and boat history. Canoes were said to originate around 8,000 BC, which is about 10,000 years ago. And if you take a look at the bottom right-hand picture, you can see that that is a picture of the Pest canoe, which is said to be the oldest canoe that has ever been found. It is a dugout canoe, and dugout canoes are what Native Americans would commonly use on the river. So dugout canoes would be created by using fire and also scraping out the inside. And I'm sure most of you have heard about Cahokia Mounts. It's about 30 to 40 minutes away from here, and it was one of the central Native American civilizations in the United States, and Native Americans would use dugout canoes to travel along the Mississippi River to go to and from these different Native American civilizations. So if you look at the two bottom pictures, on the left we have the wooden strip canoe, and then on the right we have the dugout canoe. So most of the structural integrity hasn't been changed very much, just because it hasn't really needed it, and it's so substantial on the river. John boats came a little bit later in history. John boats are a type of flatboat, so they are flat on the bottom, and this is because they traveled in more shallow waters or in backwaters, and they didn't really need the curvature on the bottom in order to cut through higher currents. So flatboats originated around 1700, and the term John boat didn't really come until the 1900s. However, it is most likely that John boats were used before the 1900s, but that term just wasn't established until then. John boats were mostly used pulled or paddled downstream or along backwaters to large portages like New Orleans and Chicago. People would work on John boats, so they would use them for fishing. They would have a lantern attached to the side of the boat, or they would use them as ferries to ferry people back and forth across the river. So here is a list of different materials, and you can see the price, the estimated price down here. So this summer I have been researching the different materials and the overall price that would be needed for this project to occur. So these materials can fluctuate, and so can the 1900 estimated total, depending on which boat is being built. Obviously, the canoe is a bit more expensive than the John boat just because it requires a few less materials for the John boat. And then some of the pictures over to the right are just some commonly used tools, or not so commonly used tools, that maybe people haven't heard of as much. So I've also learned about the many different steps to build each canoe and each John boat just by talking to different wooden boat experts, which there are very few and far in between nowadays. So for a strip canoe, you'll start off with creating the forms. Next, you're going to strip the canoe, which involves taking small strips of plywood and molding it over the form and holding it in place with glue. Then you're going to attach the outer stem, which the outer stem is just another piece of plywood that you're going to bend over the outer hole where the two seams come together. Next, you're going to scrape and sand the outer hole, and that's just to create a nice and smooth finish. Next is fiberglassing the outer hole, which most people don't know what fiberglassing is, but it involves taking a sheet or a cloth of fiberglass and draping it over, and then you're gonna pour fiberglass resin on top to seal everything in. Next, you're gonna flip it over, sand and scrape the inner hole, fiberglass the inner hole. Then you're gonna attach the gunnels, which are the outside of the canoe. Then you're going to attach the seats and then varnish the inside and outside, which is basically another layer of protection and waterproofing. With John boats is a little bit more of a simpler process. So the bottom of a John boat is what is going to be created first, and this involves stacking 3 sheets of plywood on top of each other and then having another sheet of plywood attached to the ends. Then you're going to attach the sides, attach the gunnels, which on a John boat is optional, sand and scrape the inside, attach the seats, sand and scrape the outside, fiberglass the outer hole, sand the outside, and then varnish in and out of the hole. So for future objectives, what we would like to have accomplished for this program is to curate some lessons, activities, plan different field trips for the high school students, and then obviously have guest speakers. We would also like to finalize the prices with employees in mind, and also organize the roles for these employees. Next, we would like to plan the locations for either the boat building or the field trips. And then lastly, contact different organizations that would benefit from having the experience of participating in this program. All right, does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Yeah, so you had the price per boat at around $1,900. How much of that is like the tools? Because like you wouldn't have to buy new tools for every boat. Like how much would that reduce it by if you're making 5 boats or something? Or
Yes, so basically the expenses kind of come with the fiberglass or the Kevlar cloth. That's pretty expensive. And then also the plywood. So that would be the majority of it. And then I'm guessing like the tools are, they're the rest of it, and that would probably be around $500, and the rest would go. Yeah. Yes.
I've got a sailboat and I worked with fiberglass and it's pretty horrible. I was thinking, like 100 years ago, they didn't have fiberglass and stuff. So why would you use modern techniques if you're trying to teach it historical? You know, I would think you would try to build a canoe or a john boat the way that they did it back then.
Yeah, so our goal is to replicate it as closely as possible, but we do want to use our boats in the future for other programs. So we want to be able to preserve the boats as much as possible so that they can be used on later.
So yeah, $2,000 for a boat is a really good deal. But when you think of how much time it's going to take, so how much time is it going to take? So I assume that one of these boats is probably worth like $20,000 with all the human labor that goes into it. So how long do you think it would take to make one of these boats?
So it depends whether or not that they will be pre-assembled for the high school students. So we'll have to think about like how long our program spans over, but whenever I talked to one of the wooden boat builders, they said that they could curate the program to fit a certain amount of time. So it would take about 2 months for someone who didn't know anything about it, but it could be shortened to like a couple to a few weeks if needed.
Cool, but that would be using then boat builders to send you a kit.
Yeah.
I assume the cost would go way up then.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be $2,000. Cool.
I have a question from online.
Yes.
If this were to become a recurring program or activity, what would become of the boats?
Oh, okay. Well, the boats are hoped to be used in the future for future programs. So we have the education, our different education programs, and they use the aluminum boats from different companies. But we're hoping to gather enough of these canoes in order to kind of have our own canoes to use instead of using other companies.
Did you talk to people around the area, or how far did you reach out?
So we talked to someone. His name's Shane and he is a boat builder expert in New Haven, Missouri. So Joseph and I actually drove out and interviewed him about the boat building procedure. It was pretty cool.
Who's going to build the boats?
Well, that's the kids' jobs. Yeah, so the high school students will be building the boats, and then obviously they'll have helpers.
Is there any more questions for Julia?